And a good morrow, sweet listeners. 'Tis I, Conrad of Communications. My scurvy companion, as always, is Dougethford. And welcome to A Pod by Any Other Name, a podcast dedicated to the poetry and prose of one William Big Willie Shakespeare. In today's episode, we'll cast our opera glasses at the bard's pen to determine if iambic pentameter was really the best framework for Sir William's wordcraft. We'll also delve into the accusations that Billy was a tax cheat, a grain hoarder, and a sodden-witted scallywag who didn't write his own plays, much like someone on this very podcast. But anyway, finally...
Conrad, dost thou bite your thumb at me, sir?
Nay, good sir, nary a thumb-biter to be found hitherto.
Pardon my interruption, then. I don't want to quarrel with you on the audio airwaves, but forsooth, I must declare to the heavens that this is not that podcast. This is... The Bethel School District presents a podcast about the Bethel School District, and we have a great show for you today. In fact, joining us in studio today is friend of the podcast, Chad Honig, Executive Director of Secondary Schools, and we're going to talk about the Advisory Task Force. But first, Chad, let's talk about advisory. What is it, and what students are taking part?
So advisory is a time during the day that allows teachers to work with students around topics such as college and career exploration. They are working on their resumes, they're doing social emotional learning, restorative circles. There's a number of different things that happen through advisory, and just even the day-to-day operations of a building. That could be class surveys or building surveys that, again, are inclusive of voices with students and other stakeholders in the building.
So time for some of those housekeeping type items that the schools have to take care of that students can take part in. And then also, doing that resume and things like that, that's at high school and beyond planning. And that's a state requirement, right?
Correct. That is required by the state. And so we actually engage students in a number of different activities to ensure they're meeting the actual law at this time.
So there's a lot to unpack here, and that's why we do have an advisory task force that oversees the whole operation. So who is on this task force, and how often are you guys meeting?
Our advisory task force meets monthly, and sometimes we actually have some small subgroups that meet outside of that, so there potentially are additional meetings. However, we do have a building administrator, we have teachers and counselors who sit on that task force, along with our CTE department, as well as our MTSS department that meets monthly.
Right, the folks at MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support to help with the behavioral health and social emotional learning aspect of everything. And we're talking about 6th grade through 12th grade. You said you meet every month, and that was last year too. So what goals did you have last year, and what all did you accomplish?
So there were a few key points that we wanted to tackle last year. First and foremost, as we established our team, we wanted to set out some goals of what we wanted to accomplish through the advisory task force, which essentially we landed on advisory as an opportunity to build strong relationships with students. And so we wanted a curriculum that allowed us to do that included social emotional learning, as well as the high school and beyond planning component. We also wanted to be inclusive of voice, and so there's some opportunity within that to get input from different stakeholders about the advisory curriculum. And that was first and foremost, is setting goals. We then had two other major tasks. One was to look at 6th through 12th grade scope and sequence. We wanted to make sure that what we were doing in 6th grade led to 7th and so forth, to ensure, we're ticking all the boxes for our high school and beyond plan, and then the other things we wanted to do, social emotional learning, relationship building, and so forth. The state also had a requirement that we look at a new digital high school and beyond plan tool. So they had a list of pre-approved, and we were currently using Zello. And so we looked at that along with all the other approved high school and beyond plan vendors, and we landed on School Links through a pilot process that took the full year.
That's great. Really good to get that student voice in there, especially if they're the ones that are going to be using it for the next, 5 to 6 years of their lives. And this year, what's the focus of the advisory task force?
Because we adopted a new high school and beyond plan digital platform, part of our work is unpacking all that's a part of School Links. And so there's a number of different activities. And so we have set up our initial kind of skeleton scope and sequence around high school and beyond planning for this year. Another key aspect that we need to do is we need to hear from our teachers and our students around advisory. So we already set out the start of this year and are surveying all of our teachers and students about advisory, what they feel is most important. And we'll take that data with the task force, unpack that to influence our 6-12 scope and sequence, as well as future lessons down the road.
Thanks for joining us once again. That's Chad Honig, Executive Director of Secondary Schools. And Chad, can you hold the door there? We have another guest coming in right now. This is Cody House. Cody is a special education teacher out at Nelson Elementary School.
Cody, thanks for joining us. Let's start off with a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up, and how did you get into teaching?
So I grew up mostly in Marysville, Washington, about 2 hours north of here. My mom was a paraeducator in self-contained classrooms all growing up, so I spent a lot of time volunteering in those classrooms. And when I went to college, it was a pretty easy choice to jump into education because I had a pretty solid background in education. This is my first year in Nelson. It's actually my, I think, fourth year in the district. I was at Graham Kapowson for 2 years, and then we moved away for a couple years, and I was at Liberty Middle School last year. Now I'm at Nelson this year.
And did you know right away, it sounds like you had some history with SPED classrooms. Did you know that that's kind of the direction you were going to go for right away, or was that something you discovered as you were getting your education?
It was something I knew pretty early on in my teaching program. I did a dual cert with elementary education and special education, so I could do either, but as I worked in it more, special education was the direction that I wanted to go in.
Let's talk a little bit about working in a special education classroom and some of the challenges and some of the kind of rewarding things there. What is it about that work that initially drew you to it, and what is it that kind of keeps you interested in it?
I think a big piece of it is that you get to be really creative with how you instruct and work with the students that you work with, because they have a lot of lagging skills in many different areas, and trying to bridge the gap in a way that meets their need is a challenge, but it's a worthy challenge.
What are some of the skills that you really have to be successful in a special education classroom?
First, I think one of the biggest things is patience, because it's not something that happens overnight. You have to be really diligent in the way that you instruct the students you work with, and be consistent every day. So it takes a lot of patience. Got to be creative, because these students are in special education sometimes because the status quo doesn't work for them. So you have to figure out different ways to meet the needs and meet them where they're at, and be able to wear a lot of hats. Special education teachers do a ton, from writing IEPs to managing behaviors to instructing in several different academic areas. So you have to be able to be flexible and wear a lot of hats.
I'd imagine it's your goal every school year to help your students reach their full potential. Can you think of any special success stories that you're especially proud of?
One that really sticks out to me, when I was working up in Marysville, I was working in a self-contained kind of EBD program. And we had this student join our class really early in the year, and it was pretty obvious he didn't want to be there, and basically would do nothing all day except sit with his head down, with his hair over his face. But we were consistent with expectations, with giving him opportunities to learn, to work with him, and building in opportunities to do things that he enjoyed and he was good at. He was really good at science, so we did a lot of hands-on science work. By the end of the year, he was excited to come to school. And academically, I wouldn't say we made leaps and bounds, but the change in a student who hated being there to a student who wanted to be there was a real success.
On a kind of day-to-day basis, what would you say is the best part of your job?
Really getting to interact and know these students, especially working in the small groups. You get to really know the 3, 4, 5, 6 students you work with in those groups each day. There's a lot of funny stories that come with working with these kids, and it's a lot of fun. I think I just want to give a shout out to all the special education teachers out there. It's a tough job, especially these last few years, and trying to bridge the gap with so many of our students who have so many lagging skills because of the last few years. It's not easy, but people are doing really, really good work out there.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. Connor, did you enjoy your deep dive into the world of William Shakespeare as you prepared for this week's episode?
I actually did. I learned a few things too. For instance, did you know that only one handwritten script from William Shakespeare actually exists out there in the wild?
I did not.
Yeah, it's a monologue. Actually, it's the original draft of the Book of Sir Thomas More. It's a politically charged play that targeted, in part, xenophobia happening in England. In fact, it was so politically charged that it was never actually performed. Censors at the time believed it'd start a riot.
Wow, check out the Wikipedia skills on Connor. Now, before listeners start a riot for this podcast going too long, we should say goodbye.
We shall indeed. In the words of the inimitable Billy Shakes, potting is such sweet sorrow.